welcome to our marketing webinar series. I'm Meredith. I'm the team lead of practice success here at Dental EMR. And today I have Alex Hamilton joining us. So for those of you who have actually been to some of our past webinars, Corey, Alex's business partner, has been our guest speaker on those topics. So we're so thrilled to have the other half of Hamilton Wise joining us today. Now, just as a quick recap, so far, we've covered peripheral marketing strategies, right? So how to build your referral relationships in your community, how to stand out to your patients. We've even covered on our last webinar how to utilize your free Google Business Profile tools that are available to you to make your mark in your community. So today we're diving directly into your website. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about how you can eliminate complication, whether you're building your website from scratch or you have one that's running for your practice right now, and how to build a patient-centric website, right? Now, Alex, this is really your bread and butter, so I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to let you take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself and have us dive right into this topic.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Meredith, for the introduction. I promise everyone my name is Alexander Hamilton. I know it sounds fake, but it's actually real. But I am the co-founder along with Corey, and I'm the COO of Hamilton Wise and Associates. You guys have probably heard about me, and I know at least some of our, Dental AMR's clients I've talked with personally as well, but really excited to, talk with you guys about a patient-centric website. There's a lot to get into. I think, oftentimes when you think about a website and you're, talking to agencies, usually when you think of a website, you think of it as a digital front door. At least that's what Corey and I think about. And really the main purpose of your website is really to have a narrow and straight line to get that patient to schedule an appointment with you. And oftentimes that's missed, but we'll get into the details around that, and I'll move forward and kind of talk through really what our agenda is going to look like today.
Awesome.
So really just, 6 key parts. And obviously I'll get into these since I know grunt test sounds a little weird to most if you haven't heard of it, but we're first going to go over the grunt test, which is kind of a fun exercise for everyone. Talking about old websites versus new websites and really what, brick and mortar agencies typically would do in the past and are still doing now, but kind of a new format that you should think about. Key elements, and it's really just the main key elements of your website that you should really be integrating. And then make it frictionless. And it's something I kind of talked about of having a straight line, but I'll get further into that on that slide. Then we're going to have a checklist for doctors. So it's similar to our past webinars where we provided a checklist, and we can provide this to everyone on this call after as well. But it really is just a checklist for doctors to really think about when they're looking at their own website, so they can either talk to their agency or they can try to fix it themselves if they have the tools to do that. And then lastly, we'll have a Q&A.
Love it.
Cool. So getting into actually before the grunt test, we always like to put the customer journey first. This is something you've seen throughout all of our webinars. We always like to be present because this is really the main funnel for patients when they're trying to interact with your practice. The area that we circled in red, this area of consideration, decision, a little bit awareness. Awareness is more of you hearing about a practice or getting referred to, or finding them on Google Business Profile. But as you click through, you'll go onto the website, and it's really all around consideration and decision. This is really where it's going to make or break. It's your digital front door, and it's where your patient's going to schedule and have a first impression of you from your website, outside of your Google Business Profile.
I love that we always start with the customer journey because it's kind of a gut check, right? I'm not someone who comes from a marketing background. I'm learning as we go. And I think when you kind of try to dive headfirst into it without a clear idea and clear intention, that it can often fall flat or feel like it's like pulling gum off the bottom of your shoe, right? You just can't quite get the words out. So really establishing yourself with your customer journey and knowing what the goal is and what you're trying to do is going to simplify that process for you, for your agency, however you're building your website. And I love that we keep focusing on that first and foremost.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. And I know, Meredith, you've seen this, but with other clients, whenever we build out a project plan, this is actually our key areas. And we always leave notes or areas of awareness, things we're going to fix, key projects in each area. So basically when when a client signs in, they look at a project plan, this is always a constant reminder of the key areas they should focus on. So we try to like pinpoint it in their brain that they, constantly are getting reminded of the patient journey and what's most important.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So going to the grunt test, and this is kind of a fun test that Corey and I actually do, with all of our clients, but also when we do webinars, we always bring this up. But it also really helps any dentist, endodontist, orthodontic, team member, provider, or even any of your marketing managers. It changes your mindset to really think like you're a consumer or a patient, and really what goes on in their minds when they're trying to either get a product, in this case, schedule an appointment or get treatment from your practice. And really, when I think of the grunt test, I always, it goes back to like thinking of a caveman, that's just grunting when he's looking at things. But that's really what it is, right? Like typically, and this is actually, based on studies, it really takes only 5 seconds for a patient or a client to really get their first impression of you. So it's very important, right? When they open your website, they, get a positive impression. And it really comes down to three main areas. So number one is, what do you offer? Two, how will you make my life better? And three, how do I get it? A good example that Corey and I use a lot is Stark Smiles, who actually did this perfectly. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. This may be a stock image, and you may want to actually have a picture of yourself in a patient. But really, when we go through this, you'll see kind of how I'm exemplifying this, right? So what do you offer? Obviously, you see Stark Smiles, you see orthodontic specialists in Ames in Central Iowa, but you also see give your child a smile they'll love. So you know that they're offering, a smile that you're going to love and also orthodontic treatment. Going to how will you make my life better? So this one we actually like a lot because it's, give your child a smile they'll love. It's kind of, harping on the strings of your child and you want them to feel confident, but you can tell that, you're getting a smile, you're going to feel confident, you're going to love your smile. Lastly is, how do I get it? And this is really up front and center. You see there's a call to action for schedule an appointment right below, but there's also top right, you can schedule an appointment as well with another call to action. So to most, this seems like it'd be too simple because there's not a lot of information, but this is actually great because if you're going through a grunt test, right when I go onto this website, I know exactly what I'm getting. I kind of already understand the vibe. It's open, clean. There's, your doctor's smiling, you're getting a smile you love. It just makes you feel positive and you want to continue on this journey. I'll pause there too, Meredith, if you want to add any comments, because I know we took you through this process too. So I'd love to hear your, first thoughts when we walked you through it.
Yeah, I mean, I never would have thought about this, honestly, right? It's always kind of one of those things where you're like, where do I start? Especially when you're starting from scratch. And I mean, if you're using an agency, in most cases, they would provide some sort of a guideline to you of what would be on each page and things like that. But starting this out, if you're someone who's trying to build your website even on your own, it's hard to know what to look for. And all of this makes complete sense to me now that it's front and center. And to add to that, I encounter a ton of endodontic websites in our industry, just working with clients and anyone who's interested in our offerings, and they do not have this on the website. There's a myriad of things that we see on a regular basis, anything from an immediate introduction to the practice and like a whole paragraph of what they're doing to just a hodgepodge of images. And an analogy that Corey has used in the past that I absolutely love is he said, you need to be able to design your website and then take it to a stranger behind you in the line at Starbucks and say, what do I do for a living? And they should be able to tell you right off the bat within those 5 seconds, as you mentioned. So I think that's such a great way to start, right? Because to your point, the attention span of consumers nowadays is like, it's small, right? So we need to be able to grab their attention right then. And then for us being able to basically accommodate what we offer with how it's going to make your life better, there's that emotional driver, right? Which so many of us as consumers can relate to. It's not just endodontists in South Boise or whatever. It's just telling you something that you're going to be able to take away from the service that they provide. So it's even deeper than just saying who you are specifically. So I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I encourage all of you to use this test on yourself, but also like go online, even if you're shopping for something, you're looking at products. It's actually a fun exercise. And typically when we first show any doctors we're working with, about the grunt test, they come back with us and they're like, oh, I looked at 10 other practices, and I checked off like 1, 2, and 3. I only saw one. So it's actually it helps you kind of get in that mindset of, understanding your own website, but you also can, use it as an example for others as well.
Well, and as you said, it's so simple, right? I love low hanging fruit, especially when we are adapting existing things that we have. We have a website and we're looking for some easy change that we can test out and see how it produces a better result. This is really, really simple. We're not asking you to write an entire paragraph about what makes you completely different compared to everyone else in your region. We're just asking you to create a simple pitch, and then it has an emotional driver and then a call to action. So as you can see here, it's just two very short sentences. So it doesn't take a ton of time. And it's definitely something you can experiment with today instead of worrying about, how am I going to even make this happen on my website?
Yeah, no, it's similar to it's similar to your 15-second elevator pitch, right? Like when you meet
Yeah.
someone new, you need like 15 seconds to explain yourself, give the key points. So yeah, and we're going to show you, I know this will come up, we'll show you an example of, a website that doesn't pass the grunt test in our next kind of analogy here, moving forward. And that is old versus new. So really, when you think of old versus new, and I can kind of give an example of, Corey's background. And Corey really, he came from a background of, working directly with a marketing agency. And it's also prevalent now, with typical brick and mortar agencies that you work with today, or that we've, tried to transition some of our clients over to a new model. But what we mean by the first bullet point with text heavy for SEO. So typically, and I'm sure you've seen this, especially if you've worked with, older agencies, or hopefully not your current agency, but, the main goal back then was to just fill your website with as much filler words as possible. In this case, keywords, because they're hoping that, when somebody's searching online, even if they type in like, up-to-date orthodontic tools or up-to-date endodontic tools or X-ray machines, like you'll see the whole gambit of keywords. They're hoping that the keyword in your website will actually be a hook that will drive more traffic to that website. But today, it's really not relevant in the orthodontic, specialty dentist space, endodontic space, because typically what really matters is your Google business profile, and it's tied to your geolocation. And your website's tied to that geolocation as well. So really, all those, keywords, they are important, but it's really not going to move the needle. And especially because you can put those keywords in different areas, especially, if you're posting on Google business profile, if you have a blog, that's a great way to add keywords as well. But if you still have like really text heavy, websites, it's only going to slow you down, and it's really not relevant. And it also kind of ruins the, appeal to a grunt test if you just go directly to a web page and there's just a, throw up of words everywhere, and you can't really tell what's going on. What should I read first? Where do I click to schedule? And we'll give you an example of that shortly. The other piece of this is static non-responsive design. And you see this a lot. It typically just looks like a PDF, page when you go onto a home page. But what we mean by, having more of a dynamic design is, when you're scrolling down, it's moving away any information that's not, relevant anymore, or the call to action is staying present, so you actually can click to schedule wherever you're at on the web page. Or for an example, right, like say if they're in a specific page talking about like, more info or any of your services, maybe in like 10 to 15 seconds, a pop-up comes up saying, get a free quote. Those are all, areas and, factors that are dynamic and not static. But we still see that today where like, it just looks like a PDF web page that really is not dynamic for the user, and putting the user first. In this case, the
And
patient.
mobile friendly too, because we know patients are really encountering our website most commonly through mobile.
Yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, that's part of what we want you to see during the versus part.
Yeah.
Um, so the other bullet point here is, slow load times with heavy media. So whenever, you are, getting encouraged by urgency to add more media, photos, videos, sometimes there's video playing in the background of your homepage. It's only going to slow down your load times. Sometimes it works, especially if you're only using like, relevant media that you think is, pertinent to that patient to actually want to schedule with you. Most times it's actually irrelevant. And, oftentimes like a lot of patients aren't going to really click on a video unless it's, a specific case. If they really want to say, if they want to view a root canal, and they want to understand how it's being performed. And you only can really tell if you actually have the data to see that and what your patients are actually clicking on. But in most cases, there's a lot of slow load times due to heavy media use. And it's typically prevalent with brick and mortar agencies, again, because they want to take as much information as possible and put it on your website, without realizing that it could really be a detriment with slow load times, which will cause your patient to potentially leave and find someone else.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Meredith. Anything else?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you on that because I do see a lot of websites that have a lot of like ADA or AE supported
Mhm.
media, and we'll talk more about that later and how you could or decide not to use it depending on kind of what your patient needs are. But it definitely can slow you down when you're using all sorts of different combinations of media on your website.
Yep. Yeah, and the last piece is clunky navigation and overloaded menus. So we do see this a lot, where typically, when you get on a website and you don't really know where to go or how to navigate because there's so many menus. I've oftentimes seen, some menus that have a drop down with like 7 pages and you don't really know what to go to, but it's also slowing you down. It's overloaded. In most cases, unless you actually are using your data, like a lot of patients aren't going to be clicking on like a random page that's, let's for an example, say giving you information about, your family, which we've seen before, where, that could still be added in, but in a more intuitive way. And oftentimes it's slowing you down and it's causing the patient to like jump to different pages, and it's not really a straight linear line for them to actually schedule an appointment with you. And we'll give some examples as well, really what that can look like and kind of the key, elements that you should be including in your website. But also, we always want to stress that typically whenever we are making changes, you always want to look at the data first and have the data dictate what you want to keep on your website. But I'll get more into that once we talk about key elements. Now going to like what actually is something you should look for in terms of like a new website. You want it to be clean, concise content, similar to the grunt test, which we mentioned, responsive and mobile friendly. Meredith mentioned mobile friendly. I would say probably more than 50% of your patients are going to be on their phones first. Oftentimes they'll only, go back to, their full, computer layout once they're back home. But in most cases, they're going to be on their mobile device, either at the first start of the process or towards the end of the process. So it's really important to make sure that it's mobile friendly. And there's ways that your agency actually can view your website through the mobile lens, so they can ensure that it still looks clean and it's obviously responsive in the mobile platform. Third part is fast loading and optimized media. It's really important here because oftentimes when you go onto websites, I mean, it happens to all of us. Like oftentimes, for an example, right? I am trying to plan a trip for my honeymoon, but I was trying to click on, buying tickets to go to some museums, but the load times were so slow because they had so much media, videos in the background, there's photos, and I couldn't actually get to, scheduling a ticket to actually go to this museum. And it made me actually go to a separate third-party provider to actually get the tickets I needed, just because it was so annoying to go through this load time, and I couldn't actually get to schedule those tickets for those museums. Last piece here is streamlined intuitive navigation. So we'll talk more about this too when we talk about frictionless and what that means. But you really want it there to be a straight, narrow path for a patient to kind of follow along to schedule an appointment. And ideally, if they have questions along the way, you still want that to be intuitive as well, right? So if they do need additional info, there has to be ideally a call to action to where they can, access that info. But then also, what are they doing after they get to that page, right? And ideally, you want to get them to scheduling an appointment. Any other
Perfect.
points on this, Meredith, that you wanna bring up?
No, I think it's really good, and it opens up really a lot of topics that we're going to dig into because I know that there are a lot of attendees that we're going to have that already have built-in websites, and you may be thinking, gosh, well, like, how do I keep my patients educated and informed if I don't have
Mhm.
media? Or how do I make sure that I'm taking care of all of their needs if I don't have all the different options in there? So we're really going to break it down so that you can make some educated decisions on what is working and in what is not working for your patients. Ultimately, this is your business, it's your website. You get to put on there whatever you want to, but really all we're doing at this point is just showing in history and research what works and what doesn't, and how you can use those tools to dig in and figure out how you want to change up your website as well to make it even more efficient. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and so this is kind of an example we were talking about, and you can, it's like we wanted to show like a very deep contrast here, right? So like when you look to the left, this is actually this is a dentist, a dental office. I mean, it's really hard to tell. Like I almost thought it may have been maybe photography, maybe it's actually a lawyer. You can't really tell, and obviously they didn't really use a good choice of the coloring here either, but you can see it's very text heavy. You don't really know what you want to look at first, where you want to go. You can see they have call this number to schedule a consultation, but they also have like a message you can leave. So do they want you to leave a message, or do you need to call? It's really not intuitive for any potential client going on this website. It really looks like a PDF like resume of this dentist, and you're reading about him, but you can't really tell, what you're getting, what they're offering. And it's quite confusing. It also looks out of date as well. And I mean, obviously, we can give some recommendations on the color usage as well, but looking to kind of a new website. And again, when we look at these two, right, like there are obviously always areas to improve, even with a newer looking website, but you can tell immediately that it passes the grunt test for you. It tells you exactly what you're getting, tells you where they're at, and it also, shows you how you can get it with scheduling an appointment. It's very crisp, and it really tries to eliminate any noise so you can actually get the key information you need. But it's also not taking away from getting additional information if you go to like the menu drop down of services, locations for patients, about, and learn more. Cool. So going to the key elements, and it's kind of, these are elements we kind of talked through, but I wanted to make it clear of like what typically Corey and I see when we work with practices. So these are really the key elements you should have in your website. And oftentimes, it depends on, the typical client we're working with, right? Every client's patient, panel is going to be looking at different things based on their history, their demographic, your location. But typically, whenever Corey and I go into any practice, we always take the data first, and we have the data dictate, what are the key pages that patients are really looking to before they actually, sign up with you or schedule an appointment. And typically what we've seen are like these key areas. Obviously, you always need a homepage. That's, one of the main factors. The first, front, or like, let's say like as you crack the digital front door open, that's what they're always going to see about us. Typically, we've seen patients that just want to understand more about your practice, you as an individual, your accolades, or even like your staff members, right? Services, equally important. They want to, understand what services they can get, from that practice. Patient info, and oftentimes, this is where you can add a blog post, more detailed information about any procedures, testimonials, which are equally important since there's always comparing to others, and they want to see exactly, how patients are, your current patients are reacting to the work you've done. Contact us. Should be straightforward, but like they should always be led to the contact us page to schedule an appointment. That's the end goal here. And then optional, because oftentimes it depends on how you as an endodontist is getting referrals from other dentists. But we've seen this come in multiple views, where it's either a separate page to where a referring dentist can add that patient's information in, or oftentimes they just have some key information around a PDF they can download. But it really is up to you. And also there's certain cases you want to be careful, about HIPAA law. So you don't want to obviously give too much information. So it just depends here. And we want to bring it up since, oftentimes with a lot of the clients we work with, which are mostly, endodontists, orthodontists, especially dentists, we want to, ensure that this is something that you probably want to include, but it's also optional depending on what your operational process is for, having referring dentists, refer their patients in.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Because as an endodontist specifically, you have two main clients. You have
Mhm.
referring dentists and the patients that they refer to you. And from a marketing perspective, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. So you have to pick between those two audiences. And the audience that is more likely to encounter your website on a regular basis are going to be patients. Those could be patients that find you through Google just by doing an organic search. Maybe they've already had a root canal and they know that they're looking for an endodontist for future treatment. They know what it feels like. They're going to cut straight to the chase. They need to be able to find you through Google Business Profile, get what they need from your website, and schedule an appointment. Whereas even patients who have been referred by a local referring dentist are probably still going to look you up. They want to see where you're located. see where they can call to make an appointment, maybe even see if you're still the right fit for them, even though they were referred, they still have autonomy over their care and where they go. So patients really are going to be the most likely audience to stumble upon your website. But if you are looking to accommodate resources for your referring dentist, what we're saying is they kind of have a small section that's delineated on your website. So if they need to click on it and get resources for how to send you information, how to get in contact with you, how to access your portal, etc., that's a great space for it. But the majority of this content, homepage all the way through contact us, is going to be very patient forward. It's going to be looking for, making sure that you're answering questions that patients would have specifically about your practice, what to expect, how they can get prepared, how they can contact you, of course, to schedule that appointment. And we actually have a very specific list in each one of these categories. So what we'll do after this call, when we send you the recap recording, you'll have a broken down bullet point, which talks specifically about what type of content would go into each one of these sections, just in case you're wondering, what should I include and what maybe is a little bit more, extra that I don't have to have on my website on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and the last piece about like referring dentists, oftentimes we incorporate this into the patient perspective, whenever we're working with our clients anyway. So what I mean by that is, when a patient is on your website and they do get to a scheduling page and they're filling out the form, you can easily incorporate that into your form saying, were you referred to by, a dentist? Yes. And then you can leave that dentist's name. So even if it's not getting captured, from the dentist perspective, that's like leaving a referral for you, the patient can also pick it up, when they're scheduling an appointment as well.
Absolutely. I love that.
Awesome. So make it frictionless. I know I've been talking about this a lot, but really what I mean by frictionless is when you think of your website, it's a misconception, but a lot of people want to just add as much information as possible because they're assuming that, a patient is going to have a attention span that's more than 20 seconds. But typically, like the main focus of your website is to get that patient to schedule an appointment as efficient as possible. And typically, there's a lot of things that can, really get the patient off their actual trajectory to schedule an appointment. These are some examples, but think of your website, as a windy road to get to schedule an appointment. And the goal is to make that, road less windy, ideally as straight as possible to get a patient to intuitively, get to scheduling an appointment. Because that's the main goal here. Like your main goal is like as your digital front door being a website is to get a patient to trust you and also to schedule an appointment with you. Some examples, right? As I mentioned, like the first winding of the road, there's, failed grunt tests, right? Like that, example we showed above, it's a lot of words. You can't really tell what you're looking for. Oftentimes, like they would just they'll go to another website because, they just frankly see that it's really old and they can't really get to the main focus points they need to get to. Another example, right? Caught up in unnecessary pages. Corey and I go through this, in every case whenever we work with clients where they have, as I mentioned before, like some menus where it drops down like 6 pages, but the patient clicks on that, they don't know how to get back to the home. There's no like call to action to get to schedule or learn more. It's not intuitive, and now they're kind of stuck in limbo in your website in like the 20 pages you have, which potentially aren't as relevant. And you can ideally just, try to maximize your website to make it, more efficient and ideally still include that information, but, make it easier to navigate. Another example is CTA is not present. So let's say if the patient does potentially click on, info about your practice, but you don't have a call to action present. So they're, in that page, but there's still not a call to action for them to actually get to the scheduling page. So they'll have to backtrack, either, press back on their tab or, to go back to the home page by clicking your home page. Other examples, and this is something that we always try to stress whenever we look at like the UX design is 3+ clicks to schedule. It seems hard at first, but like it's oftentimes easy, once we kind of talk through this with, our clients, but really ideally you want someone to click, 1 or 2 times, not, 3 is okay, but you want to like limit the amount of, click points that a patient needs to actually schedule an appointment with you. Because these are all opportunities for them to get, distracted, hop off, do something else. Great example. One of our, first clients we started working with, their website, was made from a brick and mortar agency. It was templated. They had a lot of information, but when you click to schedule, it, had an API to their EMR scheduling tool. In this case, actually, I think it was their actual scheduling tool, not their EMR. But it had a list of information for them to fill out. One of them actually was add your social security number, which is wrong for many reasons. You shouldn't have that on your website. But it was just so much unnecessary information that they can collect, further on in the process, where it's taking that patient potentially, 5 clicks, almost 15 minutes to fill out, this one form to actually just schedule an appointment, which is not even an appointment for them to get started. It's a consultation appointment. So that's, one example that, I know that's the extreme, but we've seen it before where it can get pretty crazy. And then, the
Oh, I think we might have lost Alex. Alex, can you still hear us? Looks like he might have hopped off. If you guys can still hear me on the webinar, go ahead and mark in the chat that you can still hear me here, and we'll just keep on going until he can regain connection. See here. Oh, looks like he hopped off. So we're just going to keep going. There you are.
Oh, what just happened there? Did it turn off?
Yeah, we lost your connection there for a second.
Oh,
I was
guys.
about to take over.
I am back. I was going to pause there anyways. I was asking if there's any information or any questions or any information, Meredith, you wanted to add here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were heading this off in the beginning, right? Your grunt test is number one, you need a CTA. You need a call to action. You need to be able to capture that scheduled appointment, right then and there. Primarily because, as we talked about, patients are going to be most likely the audience that are going to jump into your website, right? So if patients are jumping into your website, you have to assume that patients might be at different parts of the journey. They may already know who you are, and they don't need all of the superfluous information you've added on your website. They just need to schedule an appointment. So make it first and foremost on your homepage. Alex had actually talked about even kind of the mobile adaptiveness of newer pages now, where the CTA kind of it's like a sticky button, so it follows them wherever they go. That's another great way to make sure that your CTA is present. So no matter where your patient goes on the website, if they are trying to get additional context about you and trust or build that trust, that CTA is following them so they don't have to go looking for it again. I totally agree on the multiple clicks for getting them to schedule an appointment. And I have some additional information about, kind of mechanisms for scheduling an appointment that I will say here in just a moment, but make it as easy as possible for patients. To Alex's point, you want to capture as many patients on your website as possible. They're not calling your office to schedule an appointment. This is an opportunity to capture those patients that can't call for whatever reason. So if they are scheduling an appointment with you, bare minimum information, first, last name, phone number, email contact, maybe they're even choosing from different appointing options, whatever that may look like, the bare minimum information that your team needs to make a follow-up call or a text message to confirm and solidify that appointment, that's what needs to be in the CTA form itself. Now, speaking to that, no matter how you're setting up your website, if you have an existing website or you're building one from scratch and you're wondering, well, what if I don't have an automated system for scheduling? You don't have to have an automated system. There are plenty of systems now that are using AI and integrated systems with practice management that will actually schedule an appointment and you can confirm. But if you're not looking to spend extra on a service that does something like that, or maybe you don't have an integrated service at your fingertips, having a form that sends a notification to your staff is just fine. You're just capturing that initial information. So your team is still going to have to do a little digging to get insurance info, find out what they need exactly, and get their schedule confirmed no matter what system you're using. So don't feel like just because you don't have an automation or an integration in place that you're behind the 8 ball. You can absolutely use it as a form where you're just gathering that initial information. The last bit that I'll say about the unnecessary pages, Alex and Corey are always pushing us through analytics on a regular basis. And the great thing about analytics is that if you have an existing website right now and you're just wondering, gosh, I just don't know which pages I can let go of, right? I feel like they're all serving a purpose, but you just don't really know what needs to stay in there versus what can come off. Same goes if you're building a website from scratch and you're like, I just don't know what my minimum viable product is, right? I don't know what is the bare minimum I need to have on a website starting off. The best way to do this is to, number one, look at your analytics. If you have an existing website, find out where patients are getting stuck, find out which pages don't have engagement, find out which pages are not getting any views. That's your telltale sign that you could probably hide those pages, do some additional testing, and see if your conversions go up because you're reducing some of that noise. For new practices, opening up your website from scratch, you can also use the approach of what are patients asking for? When patients are calling into your practice, there's going to be a handful of frequently asked questions that most patients are going to have. And when you start to see a pattern where those patients are asking the same thing, what insurance do you take? What financial options do you have? Any sort of specialty services you offer for comfort reasons, things like that, how you stand out, those are the things you're going to want to answer on your website because you know that there's a use case for them. Patients are asking for them and you can immediately answer them on your website. So number one, your website's working more in your favor. And number two, your team members are not having to answer those questions all over again once they get a patient on the phone. So that was pretty wordy, but hopefully that was the gist I was getting through the whole entire road and all the places that a patient could potentially fall off, right? So really centralizing it. So as Alex said, that road gets as straight as possible, and you're giving patients that opportunity to use that call to action. Even if they're building information and trust along the way, they're not falling off in all of the noise. They're just kind of building on that to the point where they go ahead and schedule that appointment.
Yeah, and you make a good point. In this is oftentimes what you'll see with agencies is it's more of like a fix and sit mentality. But you have to realize your website's malleable, so it's changing constantly because your patients are changing constantly, right? So, perfect example. I'll call Meredith out, but like when we started working with her, like we oftentimes would be, like, oh, we should probably take this information off your website. She would give us like a huge stop sign saying, oh, wait, I feel like this is so important. But then every time we're like, let's go back to the data and let's see actually if like a lot of patients or clients in this case are, looking at this information. So we always try to go back. And the good thing about this, right, is sometimes we could be wrong, right? Oftentimes if we make a change and we see that maybe it's actually, lowering the amount of, scheduled appointments, then we'll, look back at the data and then make a change, the next 2 to 3 weeks if we're seeing there's actually, no positive change there. So you have to realize, when you're looking at the data, it's very important to not just let your website sit. You have to, be evaluating this, and in this case, on a weekly basis, as you typically what we do, to always try to constantly make changes, but also making sure you're giving enough time to, get a large data profile to understand if any changes are working or not. It's something that we see almost every client before we start working with them. They don't realize is, their website should change as their patients change and the demographic changes, or if they're building a new location, like it's going to be a different strategy and also different methodologies depending on what the data is showing us.
Well, and Alex, you and Corey actually do a free report card service for anyone who's like looking to like see, how their website is performing. So we did this in our last webinar, if you have an active website right now and you want to have a report card of how that website is performing, they can actually provide you with a lot of information about what's going on your current website. And to be honest with you, the majority of clients that we've worked with mutually, the report card is not great, but that's a great sign, because if your report card is not great and it's showing a lot of room for improvement, that means you have room for improvement. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're stuck and you're not able to increase your patient intake, or marketing things just aren't happening and you don't have any levers that you can play around with. So it's always good to be able to find spots where you can A/B test, take some things out, see how it works, and improve it along the way.
Yeah, and this heads up, Meredith, it's saying I think I just got a anonymous member saying that the chat is disabled. Just want to
Oh,
make sure you're aware of that so you can enable it if somebody has a question.
interesting.
But also
Who's
the
to
attendees can
chat
also
with?
just use the Q&A section to ask a question as well. I mean, if the chat's disabled, just letting them know.
I just enabled it. Not sure why it's disabled because this is the same settings as past recordings, but very interesting. Thank you so much, whoever brought that up. I really appreciate that. It is now open, so you should be able to post anything as far as questions, and I'll be on the lookout for them for sure.
Yeah, and just last piece of this too, since we're speaking about data, our next webinar, we're actually going to go through data or website analytics, not only your GA4, but Google Search Console, Google Business Profile, and other ways you can integrate that. And we'll talk through kind of key areas you can look to and key nuggets that are easy for any doctor, dentist to look into to really see how their website's performing. And ideally, you can make changes on your own or obviously talk to your agencies to let them know what you were seeing as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It looks like I need to click back in here. There we go. All right. So going to the checklist for doctors. So we wanted to craft a checklist, and obviously you may be familiar because we had a checklist with our last webinar around Google Business Profile, but these are just key questions you can ask yourself when looking at your website, or you can bring this not only to your agency or your marketing manager to review with you, but it usually is a good exercise for you to really see where you lie. And obviously, you're more than welcome to reach out to us too, and we can kind of help walk through this process with you. But wanted to give you guys something you can utilize after this call right away. And really just going through it, it's similar key areas that we've talked about through this webinar. But one is clarity of message, right? Is your website's message clear and patient focused? That goes back to the grunt test we mentioned above. Visual appeal. Are there high quality photos of your practice and staff? We like this because oftentimes you're more genuine if you actually have high quality photos of your own practice and your staff and patients that you're working with. If you obviously have them signed off that you can use their photo, that's very important. Oftentimes we've seen some issues there. Testimonials. Do you showcase patient reviews and success stories? This is a great tool for you to use when somebody's on the edge and they need that extra nudge to schedule with you. Looking at patient reviews, not only from your Google Business Profile, but also on your website of key success stories is really important. Navigation. Is the website easy to navigate with a straightforward layout? What I would say for you is, maybe send your link to one of your friends, family members, and ask them, if they are easily able to navigate to schedule an appointment. Oftentimes, I actually don't even, when Corey and I were building our websites or we were building other clients' websites, we actually just send it to, one of our friends, family members, and we ask them just to take a look at it. And we ask them to give us notes on where they ended up. And I think that's important because ideally you want it to be intuitive enough to where they'll get to a scheduled appointment without you, mentioning, oh, get to the scheduled appointment page. It's usually pretty telling, and it can help you kind of understand if your navigation is actually working for you and not against you. CTAs, which, as we said before, are call to actions, but are there clear and prominent calls to action? This is more important than you would think. Oftentimes, you want to have your call to action present at all times on your website, whether it be moving dynamically with that patient as they're going through pages, or if you have other call to actions added on those pages to get to the scheduled appointment page. Second to last is mobile friendly, excuse me. Does your website perform well on mobile devices? Again, based on all of the websites we work with, all the analytics, I promise you probably more than 60% are going on their mobile devices at any stage in the process. It's probably even more than that. But oftentimes how Google is interacting and catering to a key event when a patient is getting on, it doesn't track it as a single anomaly. So it usually just tracks what they're getting onto first. But I promise you it's probably more. It's only going to increase, this day and age. Almost everyone's on their mobile devices, especially Gen Z. Usually they're only on their mobile devices. So it's very important to make sure it's mobile friendly. And the last piece here is load speed. Does your website load quickly? This is easy to tell. If you go onto your website, just try to click into other pages and see it taking you more than 1.5 seconds to actually get to that page and load up. And ideally, make sure you obviously have a good Wi-Fi and you're connected, but it's pretty easy to tell. I mean, think about whenever you go on any other websites where it's kind of wonky and it's taking you a while to get to the actual page you need to get to. That's typically what your patient's going to go through. If it's even, 2 to 3 seconds off, they're going to get annoyed that they can't actually get to the information. It's not loading.
Well, and this circles back to the mobile friendly aspect of it. If you can imagine that the majority of your audience is going to encounter your website on a mobile device, the majority of them are working off of the cellular connection. The only way they would have Wi-Fi is if they're within their own home or within a
Yep.
facility where they've connected. So if you've ever tried to connect to a website that was media heavy, had a lot of images, had a lot of menus, and you're trying to load it on half of the cellular connection, it takes forever. So, again, this is kind of working hand in hand. You want something that's going to be accessible, it's not too overloaded, works well on the phone as it does on a computer, but mobile friendly can be easily overlooked. I mean, I can attest to that. Trust me, even writing emails and things like that, there's a difference between seeing something on a desktop versus a mobile. And it's quite possible that you or anyone who you're hiring to do your website will need to accommodate your website accordingly. There are aspect ratios that have to change, performances, with things moving around that have to change. You may not even present the information the same because looking at, a website on a phone versus a desktop is just strategically very different. So it's really important if you're working with an agency right now and they're not offering you the design both from desktop and mobile, that you have that conversation and ensure they're both working for patients.
Yeah, exactly. And they shouldn't charge you double for that. Like that should be included as well. But part of this too, right? Oftentimes with a lot of our clients, when you're meeting with these agencies, you're meeting on your laptop or your computer, and they're showing you like the design layout, and that's only the layout for the, monitor website layout on your computer or tablet. So it's oftentimes missed, but it's very important because, even if you go to your website on a mobile version now, sometimes like even the photos aren't actually, correctly optimized for mobile. So like they're missing or they're cut in half, or they're like really pushed all the way down to the bottom, and it like messes up your actual like photo reel of your website. So it's really important. And I encourage you all to go on your phones, if you're not right now, and look up your website and see how it looks.
Sometimes it stacks images too. Like you might have images that look
Yeah.
great, like horizontally, and then by default, mobile will stack them all. So it's an eternity before you actually get to the meat of the sandwich when you're talking about website content, because you're just filtering through all those images. So it's little things like that where if you can see how it presents itself on the mobile, you can determine, do we want to change the formatting or just remove that section? So for people on the mobile, they just experience the call to action right away instead of after a series of images.
Awesome. Well, this gets us over to Q&A. I guess we'll pause before we get to like some common questions we've seen. Does anyone have any questions?
I haven't seen anything come through yet, but I know we do have a couple of questions that we've added in just because we get them so commonly. So we can always dive to those too if anyone wants to pop their questions in the chat as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can get started. I mean, one question that we've seen, and this actually was brought up already from us, is, what clinical specific info should I add? So as we mentioned before, right, like it's your practice, it's your website. If you feel like that information is important, you should add it to your website. But we always take the approach of being having a data-minded mindset first, and we follow the data. So if we're seeing that, you have information about a root canal, as I've already used an example, and you see that a lot of patients are actually tuning into that information, then yeah, we would recommend that you keep that, on your website, obviously, because patients are viewing it, and you can obviously see how long they're on that page for. But for example, we've seen some of our clients, they have like information about their new like up to date x-ray machine, and we see that it's getting no attention, like no one's clicking on that page, no one's actually reviewing that information. So that may be an area for you to actually take out that info, make it less media heavy, and it actually can help your practice or your practice website run more efficiently.
Yeah, and I think the pressure too, right, is we want to appear as professionals in our community, and the off chance that colleagues might experience our website, we want to make sure that we have a confidence, in our community. So having all the techie stuff and the dental stuff that, trust me, I can relate to, being like really nerdy about that stuff and saying, this is so cool. But patients don't know what a gentle wave is unless you give context to what a gentle wave is going to provide them in terms of treatment outcome or comfort. They're probably not going to sway one way or another just because you have a gentle wave or don't. So you almost have to take the content you would normally want to share with a colleague and flip it so that way it's now very patient-centric and focusing on what the patient can expect from that outcome. And again, this circles back to the referral, right? Like we want to be able to have some content there for our referring dentists, but it's not truly about them 100% of the time. It's more so about our patients most of the time. So there are actually clever ways that you can work in that content where if a referring dentist happens to stumble upon your patient specific content, they get what they need to understand what you provide. So for example, you could have some information about one of the reasons why you stand out in your community as, a service provider that provides gentle care or whatever that looks like. You explain the procedure at a very high level for the patient and mention that you're able to do this with the help of advanced technology such as Gentle Wave, which allows certain patient outcomes, blah, blah, blah. So now referring dentist who sees that can see, oh, great, they have Gentle Wave. That's perfect. They're going to be more likely to know what that is and feel like they have more confidence when it comes to referring patients to you for that reason. Otherwise, we do get a lot of mixed emotions about clinical specific content that shows videos or images of the treatment itself. Again, like Alex said, use your best judgment. What you think is working for you, what the analytics are showing are working. In most cases, I would say if you're finding that your web pages, right, that are describing what a retreatment is, what a root canal is, what a surgical apicoectomy is, if you're not getting a ton of hits on those pages, take them off because you're probably better suited having that conversation with a patient in person. Now, I know that there's kind of this feeling of, well, we kind of have to make patients understand what we do, why we specialize in this particular treatment. And you can do that, but I would use some caution when showing a lot of technical treatment information or even videos of what that treatment entails. You also have potentially anxious patients that are really looking for comfort and reassurance over the technical specifics of what you're actually going to do to their tooth in the office. And you don't really pick up on those nuances with patients unless you're physically with them, right? That's one of the reasons why if you can lean heavily on having those conversations in person, you're much more likely to be adaptive to that patient's specific needs and knowing how far you need to go into that conversation with them about the treatment and what they can expect. So that's my 2 cents. I know it's not a popular opinion, but if we were to challenge any of the clinical specific information, I'm going to bet that you could probably toss a bit of that information. Patients are probably not getting super hung up on all of that. They're probably more looking for things that are associated to what does your office look like? What can they expect? Do your team members look friendly? Do you take their insurance? Do you offer financial plans? Things like that are going to immediately influence whether or not they're going to be able to afford this treatment, and then what they can expect when they're coming in.
Yeah, and then, putting my operational consulting cap on, typically, when we work through the website, but also, any other operational like checkpoints here, something that you can easily do that still incorporates this information is, once that patient is scheduled and they're getting a root canal. I know I keep using root canal as an example, but it's an easy example. When you actually get a chance to talk with them, or either talk with them on the phone if you're getting more information, or you actually see them in person, that's actually when you can drop a link to those videos or additional information about the procedure, in real time with them. So one, you're still giving them information they need so they understand the procedure. It's also an easy video link, so they can just click on it on their phone and view that video, or obviously they can view the video while they're in the practice with you. But it's also not taking up space in your website that could potentially take away from the experience of them, just getting the most influential or important information to schedule an appointment with you.
I love that because it actually lends it to the next question that we have, which is, should I add all administrative paperwork? That as well. I don't know of any patient that's just going to preemptively go in and sign 6 forms. you know what I mean, without having some context or having some instruction to do so. You might have some patients that are proactive, but in most cases, if you are trying to take care of your paperwork on your website by hosting those forms, you can absolutely do the same thing. But to Alex's point, bury them for a bit. Bury them on a hidden page where you're actually able to send that link for a convenience to your patients once they've booked an appointment and you're giving them instructions to fill out that information. Otherwise, in most cases, it is taking up space. It is potentially media that you're holding on your website that you don't necessarily need for that first patient experience. And, you know, unless you see a lot of proactive patients coming in and just filling these forms preemptively, I'm going to guess that they're going to need a little bit of guidance and, you know, instruction to fill them out after you've talked to them. So why not work it into that second half of the conversation, as Corey's talking about, instead of just right in the beginning, hoping that we're going to cover the things that they need right away when they're not really filling out those forms on their own.
Definitely. No,
Love
I
it.
completely agree. Moving to how can I update my website? So, what we encourage is obviously try to learn as much as you can about your website. So ideally you can make some changes, but in most cases, endodontists don't have the time, right? So I encourage you to have a strong relationship, with your agency. Ideally, you already have one, and you can bring up, these key areas to them and kind of work with them through either the data or any changes you might want to see. Talk to them about the grunt test. Hopefully they understand the grunt test and kind of list out those checkpointed areas of like things you would like changed. And also too, like if you do have any additional questions about this, we can always, I'm more than happy to get on a call with you and even just talk with you about keywords you can use with your agency, or even easy updates you can make if you're using WordPress or any other hosts to host your website. So let me know. I'm happy to help as well.
Yeah, and we actually have a question in the Q&A that's very much related to this next question of how do I know if my website is working? The question is, how do you know what people are looking at on your website? And the great news is there's absolutely a way to know exactly where your patients are going, what they're clicking on, where they're landing, where they're sticking, where they're getting stuck. So
Yep.
if you are not getting that amount of detail, number one, you can get it yourself if you're managing your own website by using, like, for example, Google Analytics. Alex helps us use DataBox. There's all sorts of different ways that you can gather that information and determine what the customer journey looks like on your website and where people are landing and getting stuck. If you are working with an agency, they should definitely be providing that information. And they shouldn't just be providing you the positive outcomes. They should be providing you all outcomes. Because as we mentioned before, where people are dropping off or you're not getting as high of a rating, that gives you a lot of context as far as where you can drop the weight off of your website. So you need to be seeing what's working, what's not, so you can continually pivot going forward. Now, if you are working by yourself and you don't have an agency, in our next webinar next month, we are doing a full breakdown of the analytics, what to look out for. Alex taught me so much about this because when I'm looking at these analytics, I'm thinking, why should I care about these different things? So as I mentioned, there's a whole plethora of information from how people are finding you on your website, what pages they're landing on, what pages are they sticking on, what are they clicking, right? So you have a really good idea of what is a successful journey for patients versus some things that you can drop off.
Yeah, and just to answer that question briefly too, like ideally, and we'll get into this on the other webinar, but you should be looking at GA4, which ideally should be connected to your website, Google Search Console, which basically tells you where folks are clicking, how they're clicking to get to your website from Google, but then also Google Business Profile Analytics. And then in some cases, you can use outside tools like SEMrush as well that can help you. But usually best case scenario is your agency should actually have everything built in one platform for you to view. It's actually typically what we do with DataBox, where we can actually show a funnel of like, hey, you can see exactly what patients clicked from Google directly to your website, went to this page, like say an info page, then clicked to schedule. So we can track exactly, from the data, how patients are actually, scheduling appointment through their own pathways. And then more importantly too, oftentimes we like to also build, an API or a bridge to operational data. So we actually can show you, from all the schedules you had, how many patients actually ended up paying you based on what service, and it can show you kind of that return on investment from your agency as well. So hopefully they are doing that. If not, I'm going to give you a lot of tips on how you can coach the agency and tell them what you want to look for. Because oftentimes they just kind of let it sit and they're only showing you the positives. I think it's actually more important to show the negatives because that's areas you can work on, and it's areas that you're probably going to get, ideally more patients to schedule, which means obviously more income and more cash flow. So
Yeah, and if you can't wait a month, because we do this webinar every month, it'll be October 11th next month that we're going to be hosting this webinar. Reach out to Alex. He will do a consult with you and give you all sorts of tips for how you can look out for this information or what he could potentially provide you if you're needing kind of a step up in figuring out what your analytics look like. Just to clarify, since we do have a bit of a technical lingo here, GA4 is Google Analytics, right? Is that out? What is
yep,
Alex?
that's
That's the
correct. Yeah,
latest.
so
That's
GA4
the
is Google
latest
Analytics.
version. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was labeled something else, and GA4 is like the most up to date, powerful analytics that they have. So you can definitely connect that and provide you some information at that point on a website basis.
Definitely. Yeah. It
Awesome.
used to be called like Universal Analytics, and they switched over to GA4 because they wanted to incorporate more autonomous tools. I think they're trying to incorporate AI at some point as well. I think they may have a little in there, but you want to make sure you're up to date too in terms of your GA4 because your agency or you would have to be switch over. And I think the deadline was last year at some point. So something you can look
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know we're at time too, but I want to answer this last question, and we kind of already got to it, but how do you incorporate referring dentists? And again, this is up to how you are, working with your referring dentists. I always say like you already should have a strategy with all of your referring dentists in your area. Either if you're, sending them emails, newsletters, or you have someone, meeting at the practices, or you as the doctor is meeting with them, for your own webinars, or but in terms of the website, as we mentioned, right, you can either have a separate landing page where referring dentists can go on and actually refer that patient directly to you. You can do it from the patient end, which we also recommend, where when a patient actually gets nudged from a referring dentist to go to your website and schedule, they can just incorporate that information when they're scheduling. But it's really up to you and your relationship, with that or with your referring dental market, right? Oftentimes it's hybrid, but we always say, refer to whatever your strategy is, and hopefully you have a good strategy already to how you should be interacting, with your referring dentist, because you don't want to leave it out. It's very important. It's a large part of your business. You just want to make sure you're incorporating it, the right, efficient way.
Well, and I think too, it's being realistic about like our referring dentists jumping on our website and just exploring all the
Yeah.
pages just because they're bored and they don't have anything else to do. In most cases, if they are exploring any of your about pages, your services pages, it might be because they're introducing themselves to you and trying to establish if you are going to be a good specialist candidate that they could send patients to. But once they do that, they're done, right? So most call to actions that we have found historically when working with practices is that most of those referring dentists are really just trying to get to the information they need to send a patient your way, whether that's a contact us form or it's a referral form or it's a portal that they can log into and see information. So in most cases, it's because they have a patient and they're trying to forward that information to you and get it, to you as quickly as possible. So keep that in mind that their needs would be significantly smaller in percentage to the needs of patients. And that's one of the reasons why we say patient-centric website, because we are really catering more to what patients need initially, more so than the referral themselves. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Of course.
Always love working with you guys and having all of your information that you can share. It's so beneficial for our endodontic community. Just a quick recap for everyone that has joined in today, or anyone that's watching the recording. Of course, for those that are live here today, I'll have the recap recording and an email here shortly. But we are having a follow-up webinar on Friday, October 11th at 1 p.m. Central Time. That's going to basically be covering analytics, how to see where you're losing patients, essentially, right? What is the patient journey currently on your website, and how you can use that information to adapt your strategy, whether it's simplifying or adding new tools that you're missing. So we're definitely going to be diving into that. So anyone who has questions about those analytics, as I mentioned before, if you can't wait a month, feel free to reach out to Alex. I'll include his email in that follow-up message as well with a recap recording. But yeah, other than that, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you again, Alex, so much for your time.